Probably the most feared portion of a guitar build is the neck. A lot of people are terrified about the neck. They think they can't do it. They're afraid of it. They think that it has to be super accurate, and there's all sorts of special things that need to happen or you will have a failed neck. And they're partially correct. So what we have here is the template from the very first video in the series that we made, and it already has all of the measurements correct. Everything about this neck is exactly the way that we want the actual finished neck to be. In the very first video, I cover the designing of the neck, the measurements of the neck, how to determine the angles of the neck, the length of the neck, everything, how to make the template. It's very important that you have the proper template and the proper measurements before you decide to go ahead and start cutting out a neck. All of that is covered in the very first video. So what we have here though is a typical piece of maple, and you'll notice on this piece of maple that even though the grain is not perfectly straight, it's fairly straight. And this is what we're looking for. We want to have a straight grain when we're building our neck. We also want to make sure that the moisture content of the wood is an acceptable amount. If it's too wet, as soon as we start cutting this thing, it's going to want to start twisting and warping and everything like that. So the wood has to be cured. It has to be at the proper moisture content. There's a lot of people that will tell you when you're building a neck you have to use quarter sawn wood. This is not true. You do not have to use quarter sawn wood. Quarter sawn wood will help with the strength of it a little bit, but it is not necessary. What I'm going to use is a piece that is what's known as flat sawn. And because of the moisture content of this wood, and this had been cured and everything like that, and the grain being fairly straight, I don't have to worry about this neck not having strength or warping or twisting or anything like that. Flat sawn is just fine. You will get a little bit more strength from a quarter sawn piece of lumber though. Now, there is also another thing that we could use, and that could be something that is laminated, where maybe we were to cut 1-inch strips of this out and then turn them all on their side and then glue them together, or maybe put a piece of walnut down the center, a decorative piece of wood. You can do that as well. That will add some strength to the neck, but once again, it is not necessary. So what I want to do is I want to take this template, and I want to put this center line as in as close proximity to the direction of the grain here. So if we have grain going at a slight angle this way, I would want to turn the neck this direction. If it was going this way, obviously the second, the other direction, but because this is fairly straight, something like that will do just fine right here. There's certain areas of the wood I would like to avoid if possible. I would like to avoid areas like this. Down here, you might not see it as much. Down here, getting close to the edge, like right there, I would want to avoid as well. Everything else looks fine. Things like this, up in this area of the neck, not so big of a deal, okay? Things like this, down very low on the neck, not that big of a deal. Things like this in this area can turn into a big deal. So you want to try to find a nice even grain if possible, and you want to have the neck, the direction of the neck be in correlation with that grain. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this down, and I'm going to take a marker just so that way you can see it much better. Usually I use a pencil, and I'm going around the outside of this template. And I'm purposely not holding this this marker exactly right at the edge because this gives me my 1/8 of an inch that I need. Okay, and I'm not worried about marking anything right now other than just the outside, like this. Okay, I'm not worried about whether this is for a left-handed guitarist or a right-hand guitarist because we can always just flip it over. But what I want to do now is I want to take this to the bandsaw. And if you don't have a bandsaw, you can use a jigsaw. And I want to cut this line. And I want to cut on the line because I know if I cut on the line, it gives me my 1/8 of an inch. So when I go ahead and I put the template back on and I use the template as also a router guide, everything is nice and neat, nice and perfect. It'll take it easy on my router bits, and it'll be a fast, neat, straight cut. So I'm going to take this to the bandsaw, cut this out, and when I come back, we'll go to the next step. So now that I have this cut out the way that I wanted it to be cut, I can go ahead and get ready to start routing this. Now, depending on the condition of the wood, you may have to run it through a planer to get it to the proper thickness, or to take any weird shapes or bows or anything out of it. The important thing to remember is, especially with this particular kind of neck, we start with 3/4 of an inch. Okay, we don't want to use 5/8 or anything like that. We want 3/4 of an inch. You can use 1 inch if you want to, but you're going to have to take a little bit more wood out. Generally speaking, the thickness in the heel right down here is about 3/4 of an inch. Depending on the guitar manufacturer, sometimes it's slightly more. Okay, but the important thing is a minimum of 3/4 of an inch. Now this 3/4 of an inch that we're talking about, this part right here will be setting inside the guitar, right in where the heel of the neck is. Okay, whether this is a set neck or this is a bolt-on, this portion sets there. This does not usually get modified in the thickness, but from here this portion does get modified in the thickness when we put our neck profile on here. This obviously is going to change the thickness here, and then this has a tendency to kind of dip a little bit, and this part stays flat back here. That doesn't change, but up here this gets curved and it goes down this direction. Now this is obviously based on the fender design of a neck, but your neck does not have to be like that. Just remember, this part up here does not get modified where the fretboard sets. If anything, up here is the only portion that's going to be modified, and we need to make sure that this portion is thick. Okay, like around 3/8 of an inch thick, a 1/2 inch thick. You can't have it too thin. If you have it too thin, first of all, it'll be flimsy and it'll break. But also, when you put your tuning machines inside here, there won't be enough wood for them to actually be able to grab. So generally, a good rule of thumb, 3/8 of an inch to a 1/2 inch is what you want in this area. Depends on the type of tuners that you're using. So make sure you know the height of the tuner that you're using and how much space that you're going to need in order for the nut to clamp tight on the top of this. Generally speaking, the rear of this does not get modified either. And we'll see a little bit more about this as we go on. So just like before, when I was making the template, I'm going to put a piece of double stick tape on here. One thing to keep in mind before I start doing anything else, if this piece of wood right now had started twisting, I wouldn't use this piece. If I started seeing a bow in it, I wouldn't use this piece. This piece has to stay fairly consistent throughout the entire time that you're actually working with the wood here. If during any time it starts twisting or bending or doing something that it's not supposed to be doing, it's because you did not cure the wood well enough. And this is why it's really important to make sure that you use the proper moisture. You have the proper moisture content in all the wood that you're going to use. You can get away with a little bit moisture in something like the body because it's not going to change too much. On a neck though, it's very important that everything is just right. So let's go ahead and put this on here. And we want to keep that 1/8 of an inch all the way around. Okay. Make sure that this is nice and tight. Now before I actually get ready to start routing this, I can see this area right here. There's a huge amount of wood. I'm going to take this back to the bandsaw, take a little bit of that off of there. I'm going to give my router bits a little bit of a break. You know, don't let your router do too much work if you can prevent that. It'll allow your router bits to last a lot longer. You won't have to sharpen them as often. It'll also help prevent the wood burning up. There's a lot of sugar in maple. During the time that you're routing, you can get burn marks down the side, and they're kind of hard to sand out. So the less wood that you have around the outside that you have to route off, the faster the project's going to go, the cleaner it's going to go, and then the easier it is on your tools. So let me go ahead and take this back to the bandsaw. I'm going to trim up a couple of these spots that I think are a little heavy with the wood, and then we'll get ready to route this. So I've done a little bit of trimming on the neck just to make it where it's a little bit easier on the router bit. But this is something else that's also very, very important during the time that you're using your router on either the neck or the body. If you're planning on painting the body, then you should still be concerned with it, but you don't have to be as concerned. If you're doing something where it's a natural finish, where everybody's going to see everything, you have to be concerned with this. And once again, you want to try to make the outside of what you're cutting as thin as possible, because if it gets too large, there is the possibility of what's called chip out. And so during the time that this router bit is coming up here, it might grab part of this grain and just throw a big chunk of this wood out. And you know, you'll be able to see it. Now sometimes you can glue that piece back and it's completely invisible, but most of the time you can't. And you have to be careful of that. The best way to make sure that doesn't happen, very thin, very gradual, slow cuts. And you know, be also very aware of the direction of the grain and the direction of the spin of the router bit. If the router bit is also very dull, you can risk this. Improper speeds of the router, that can cause it. Another thing that can cause it is going in the wrong direction or moving too fast with the router. So, you know, once again, I said this in the very first video, your tools, make sure you know how to use your tools before you start, you know, experimenting on, you know, your precious pieces of wood, the stuff that you've spent money on or time on or whatever. Get where you can use them, understand how the tool works, make sure that it's not just knowing how it works, it's the feel of the tool too. You have to know when the tool is speaking to you saying, hey, we better not do this, something's not right. So let's go ahead and start routing this out. Just like always, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp this so it doesn't move anywhere. And I'm going to do one section at a time. Now in this case, I'm not going to worry about having a sacrificial piece underneath it yet. Using the same template bit that we used earlier for making the templates, even though this is getting a little dull, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use it on this. It's still sharp enough. So I have one section down here partially done, and I'm running my hand back and forth because even though it might look like it is nice and smooth, it might not be. Like right here is a part I can feel that isn't perfectly smooth, so I'm going to end up running the router over this section one more time. I'm going to do a double pass. I want this to be just as straight as the template itself. Okay, so we're good here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move the clamp, or I can just flip this, and I'm going to be doing the exact same thing on the top end toward the headstock. And I'm going to be very cautious when I'm doing these turns and I'm getting up in areas like this, because if there's going to be chip out anywhere, it's going to be happening here and in areas like this. Take your time. If the wood starts sounding like it's about ready to chip out, you'll know it's going to sound like it's splintering. Slow down, stop, move the router away, bring it in front of the cut, bring the router in and slowly bring it backward, and then it'll cut in the opposite direction, and it'll make it where it's much less likely to have a chip out. Now at this point, since I've got a nice even about 3/8 to a 1/2 inch cut out down the side of this, I could remove the template and then just kind of use the same setting as I have there to go through and finish this up. I'm going to leave the template on, and I'm going to put a sacrificial piece of wood underneath it, or something just like I was using earlier in the other video to make straight lines, and use that. That way I don't have to have any wood underneath it at all, actually, and I just have this elevated off the table, so when I make my cuts I don't have to worry about my router bit digging into anything. The little bit of fuzzy material on the bottom, nothing to worry about. You're going to be sanding anyway. It's paper thin. It'll come off with either a razor or just a little bit of sandpaper. Generally, I do this a lot differently. It's more efficient the way that I do it now, but my stuff is set up for production. Right now I'm just showing you simply how it's done for somebody that just has a basic shop at their home. So now that we've got that finished, what I want to do is I actually want to mark the center. Now on the template I've already done center on it, so all my lines are already set up. So I'm going to come over here and use my square, put it on top of the template, so that way I know for sure everything is in a perfectly straight line, and draw straight through right there. Same on the other side. See, when you do all your measurements on your template, you only have to do them once. And you also know from here on in everything is going to be consistent and it's always going to be accurate. I'm going to do the same thing up here. And the same thing down here. Okay, so from here I can go ahead and remove the template from here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my center line from here, put my arrow like I always do, come over here and do the exact same thing, put my arrow like I always do, same here and same here, and transfer all of these lines to the top. Now I'm going to measure this to make sure that that line is actually centered. You only get one shot at this, so you don't want to mess it up. It's okay to measure 2-3 times. This is not perfectly centered, okay? So it's a good thing that I measured it. It's about a 1/16 off. So it's about right there. The center is actually about right there. And what caused that center to be off was not the template, it was just on the edge of that template I went a little bit too far toward the top when I marked it. So right there we're good. We have that centered. I'm gonna measure it down here as well. This should be pretty close, and it is. Okay, so we're good. Some of the burning that's going to happen on maple, like this with the router, this is because the speed of the router, the dullness of the router bit. You're going to get this, okay? Now, with new bits, not as much. But this is because of the sugar being burnt, and because maple has a lot of natural sugar in it. And this is going to end up being sanded, so I'm not overly worried about that. This one right here is going to be a pain in the butt to sand out because of the location of it. But other than that, all the other little burns and stuff, this will come out with some basic sanding. A very, very sharp router bit. Also, making sure that you're moving the router at the proper speed and the speed of the bit are all accurate. It'll help prevent that. Okay, but almost everything that could go wrong during the time that you're building your guitar can be fixed. It can be repaired. You know, it's rare that you have to get a piece of wood and just throw it in the garbage. It's rare. Happens, but it's rare. You just have to be clever about what you're doing, and you know, sit there and say, is there a way for me to fix this? Is there a way that I can salvage it? You might not be able to use this neck as a natural finish. You might have to put a little bit of Bondo somewhere and paint it, okay? And some people say, Bondo? Yep, Bondo. Almost every, I wouldn't say almost, I'm going to say every manufacturer on their painted guitars will use Bondo. Many times that's what actually ends up happening with some of the guitars that are painted. They started out as one of the models that was supposed to be unfinished with a natural, well, I should say not unfinished, but a natural finish. something happened during the manufacturing process and they said, can't use that. So what they do is they bond to it and they say, throw this in the pile that we end up painting. Okay. All right. We're looking pretty good. So let me flip this back over. What would determine if this is going to be left-handed or right-handed? Okay, that's a good question. Well, if I put the fretboard on this side, this would end up being like a left-handed, and if I put it on this side, it's right-handed. That's it. Okay, you just got to flip it, depending on where you put your truss rod, because our truss rod is going to be going in very soon. But before we end up doing the truss rod, there's also a couple things I want to do. I want to sand up here. I want to get a lot of this stuff taken care of before. And I'm also going to end up cutting out a portion of the top of this. And what I'll do is I'll end up measuring for a fender, ½ inch, maybe a hair more than a ½ inch. So this particular guitar is actually going to be for a right-handed person, but it's supposed to be a left-handed style guitar because they want it to be very similar to Jimi Hendrix. So it's going to be on this side that I'm going to be taking stuff out, and this side is going to be the one that I leave alone. So the side I keep is over here. This is about a ½ inch heavy, which is about right there. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I mark that. I kind of clamp my finger and I just kind of bring this around, and then that way it gives me a line that I can use, so when I run this through the bandsaw it will be pretty accurate. And I'm going to also do the exact same thing back here. Like this, and it just gives me an idea of where I need to end up cutting this. I'm going to end up cutting it right down this way with a bandsaw, and I'm going to stop about right here, and then later on I'm going to end up putting the curve on with my drum sander. So I'm going to take this to the bandsaw right now and cut this. So what I've done is I've taken about 1/8 of this off, so that way when I get ready to actually put my curve right here a little bit later on, it's easier on the drum sander. I'm not having to push this as hard through. It's not going to be as hard on my tools. You should always be thinking about, you know, harder on the tools, harder on yourself. Like, how much work are you having to put into something in order to get it to come out? You know, use the proper tools for the proper job, and also make sure that you use them effectively, right? And that's really important. Like, you don't want to sit there and, you know, spend 2 hours with a hand plane when you have like a regular plane like right next to you. You could just run it through, and around an electric plane, it's done. Doing things by hand is not always better than using a machine, and sometimes using a machine isn't better than doing something by hand. You have to be able to weigh, you know, what is going to be more accurate, what is going to be faster, what's going to be easier, etc. So you can get a lot of different truss rods, and two of some that I use are like this. This is a type that I use on the majority of my guitars. Okay, it's got a thinner profile. It's got a smaller Allen key up here. It's a little bit longer. You know, I generally will use something like this. I always use two-way truss rods. Now, you can use a one-way truss rod. I just don't see why you do that. I mean, if you're going to be building a guitar from scratch, you might as well put the best truss rod you can get inside there. This particular one is a two-way. It's designed a little different. This is definitely made more for things like bolt-on necks. It's a little bit taller than the other one, okay? But you'll notice on this, it doesn't reach all the way to the bottom, and it doesn't reach all the way up to the nut. So what you have to do is you have to figure out, well, where am I going to put this guy? Down here, not so important. This is where it's going to get bolted to the body. This is going to be, it's rare that this part right here would ever start twisting or warping or anything along those lines. Where you're going to find most of the movement is going to be around this area, okay? So it's more important to bring this up this direction. But this is where the nut is. This is not where the fretboard is. This is the beginning of the nut. The nut itself would probably end there, and the fretboard would probably end up ending here, okay? So what we have to do is we have to kind of put this in a spot where we say, right about there, okay? So it's close to this, but it's not right exactly on that. From here, I'm going to end up marking down here. It doesn't have to be pretty. And I've already marked this, but because of this, the way that this truss rod is designed, this part is kind of large compared to the rest of this. So I'm going to mark that here, but then we also have this area where that was welded that's just a touch larger, and I'm going to mark that there. This tells me, you know, this is a 1/4 inch from point A to point B. This is a hair more than a 1/4 inch, and then this is when it gets just a little bit bigger because of the type of truss rod that it is. During the time that I'm getting ready to route this out, I don't want to eyeball it. I don't want to put the router here and just eyeball it. That's going to screw everything up. I need to make sure that this stays nice and straight throughout the whole process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a scrap piece of 3/4 inch, which is the same thickness as the maple, and I'm going to place it. Well, I can place it here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clamp this guy down to the bench. I'm going to make sure that down here is clean. Okay, the bottom of this is clean. And I'm going to use my double stick tape again. Just enough that this guy doesn't shift too much, okay? I'm not worried about this looking like it's not straight because I know that this piece of Spanish cedar isn't straight, and that's why it looks the way that it does. But this won't move. This should be fine, okay? If it does move, you can always put another piece of wood right next to it and then clamp it and just wedge this guy inside there. Because of the type of truss rod this is, if I were, there's a couple of different types of router bits that you can use in a scenario like this. Let me see if I can find one here. Okay, here's an old one. Here's an old one right here that's 1/4 inch. That's what's currently in here, and it's burnt up. You can tell it's old. Okay, this is going to give you a flat bottom. So if I put this truss rod in like this with a flat bottom, this is what I'd want to use, which is actually what I'm going to use, and you're going to see why here in a second. There's that. Another one that can be used is one that is rounded like this, and you would use this if you were going to turn it upside down like this, so that's a nice tight fit that direction. Okay. Now, the reason why I'm going to have this faced up like this is because I want this access to be higher up, not lower. If I turn it this way, I'll have to dig in even deeper in this headstock. I don't want that. I want it to be up like this, so it's just a straight shot in. Okay? We also have to ask ourselves, well, how deep does this guy go inside? You want this to be as accurate as possible. Okay, so we're going to go like that, get a measurement. You don't actually have to measure it, you just have to make sure that it's close. Now from here we have to make sure that the depth of this is correct, and one of the ways that we can do this is I can put a piece of tape down, or I can even get one of my razors, and I can hold this basically just like that. And it's going to be kind of hard to see what I'm doing here. And I'm going to keep lowering this until it is the right depth in there. Now what we have to do is determine where is this guy going to actually set, okay? And I'm gonna pick from this side right here, and I'm gonna say, let me see here, from right there to right there. That is center, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up drawing a line. If I can find my pencil, right about there, okay? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure this over. I'm just going to use my micrometer to get a measurement like this, bring it up here, and do the exact same thing. Just like that. Now that I have a mark here and a mark here, I can use that piece that I used earlier, that I was using as a sacrificial piece, to tape it down. One side I'm going to clamp, and the other side I'll just use the tape. So now that that's on there, I want to double check and make sure that this is still lined up with this, which it is. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead. We're going to turn this on, and I'm going to gently lower this, making sure that everything is exactly like it was earlier. that's my test drop. Now, by doing my test right here, I see that my hole is actually too far this way, which means I need to bring this over about 1/8 of an inch. Now, closer to center the better. If you're slightly off, you can get away with it. But closer to center, the better. What I'm going to do is, I'm not going to go the full depth the first time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do one pass, and then I'm going to do a second pass. So now I'm going to do the second pass. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to drop it in to make sure that it's got the proper depth. And we're looking pretty good right here. The distance that I have for this guy right here, I'm marking, and I'm going to grab a router bit that's about the same. And this bit I'm actually going to end up getting rid of. It's got too dull. And those are so inexpensive, there's no reason for me to even try to sharpen that to save it. I'm going to do a plunge cut right here, then slide it forward. So when it comes to routing a straight line for your truss rod, you really need to have some type of jig to do it, to make sure that it's always straight, it doesn't veer, it doesn't shift. It cuts it nice and even depth all the way through, everything nice, even, straight. And this monstrosity is something I built years ago. Every now and then I'll use it, but I have other stuff now that I use, but this is something you can build at your house. And what you do is you draw your neck on a piece of wood, which is the lower piece here. This is all MDF. And then you have your center line that you've drawn, which you can see right here that there's a center line. Then you put two very straight pieces of wood next to it where it's a very tight fit, okay? And so that way when you put your neck inside here, now this is a template I'm putting in, okay? But when you put your neck in here, this thing doesn't shift. It's solid, it's not moving anywhere. And then you put two more pieces of wood on the outsides up here, and these are your guides for your router. So when you put your router in here, all you have to do is just move it straight this way, and it'll cut a perfectly straight line inside your into your neck. And you know, obviously you have to find out exactly how wide your router base is, and you have to make sure it's center before you can mount these. But as soon as you have that, you can just set your router in here, run it straight through, cut your truss rod channel. And this one right here, you know, like I said, it's old, but it still works. I've had this for years. This is the best way to do it. So what I've done is I've got the truss rod inside the channel now that I've got this routed, and I've got this section routed a little bit more than normal, because when I come up and I have this curve, it'll give me access with the Allen wrench in order to get inside here. Okay, that's why I have this extended out a little bit more, but the curve is actually going to start about here and go that way. Okay, I have a piece of tape on top of the truss rod channel here, so when I end up putting my glue on here, I don't have to worry about the glue seeping into where the truss rod is and jamming it up and getting it locked into certain places. This happens sometimes, so you want to make sure that there'll be enough glue that when the fretboard gets compressed, it'll push and get close to the truss rod, but you don't want it to be actually in the channel of the truss rod. So putting a piece of tape like this is a good idea. So now we need to discuss fretboard material. This particular guitar we're going to be using maple, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be taking this piece of wood, I'm going to run it through the bandsaw, and I'm going to cut this just a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch, maybe about right there or so. And as soon as that is cut, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to glue it to the top of this neck. Now, cutting the fret slots in, you need to know what type of fret wire you're planning on installing, okay? Because a fret slot is dependent upon that. Every fret that you buy will have the top portion, the crown portion of it up here. And on the lower portion, you're going to end up having the tangs, okay, or the tang to it. It's got a certain depth, and you'll see that there's got like little spikes sticking out the side of it. And this is on both sides. And these spikes grab the wood, and it holds it in place. Now, in order to determine how thick you need to go, you need to know what the width is of your tang down here, okay? And so each fretboard each fret slot is really based on what kind of fret wire you're using. I can't, give you a generic number to go by because frets are different. If you're going to use jumbo fret, or you're going to use vintage, or you're going to use stainless steel, or who makes it, there's a lot of factors in that. But no matter what kind that you end up buying, which you can buy at places like StuMac or LMI or Jesco, I think it's called. There's a lot of places that you can buy this stuff. It'll tell you what the thickness is on the bottom, and typically anywhere that you can buy that type of stuff, you can also buy the saws for it, okay, the hand saws. And this one is .020, okay. This is a very old saw. It's dull. I don't ever really use this anymore. I've had this for years. But you don't have to buy this particular brand. You can often go to cabinet shops and stuff, and or I should say suppliers, where you can buy all the stuff to build cabinets, and they'll have a number of different fine saws like this of different thicknesses. You can take a micrometer down there and measure until you get close to what you need. Just ever so slightly being off, it'll work, okay? It doesn't have to be exact, but it should be very, very close. It needs to set. It needs to set inside that slot very snug, okay? So you end up marking out all of your frets, like I explained how to do that in the very first video of the guitar design and templates, and you would draw your lines. So you give yourself a little extra room down here for the nut, okay? So you're going to say that this is from here to here, it's going to give you the room for the nut. Now I'm just kind of guesstimating here because this particular guitar is not really going to require this type of stuff. But from here, we'd say, okay, this is a room for the nut, and then the beginning of the frets basically right here. Then you do your measuring and you do the math that I explained in the first video, and then you start going through, and then let's just say you end up doing all of your frets, okay? Make sure that they're perfectly straight. Then from there, you would end up using your saw, and you want to cut these things as perfectly straight as you can, going in just one direction at first, making sure that you have a good start, and then afterwards, that's when you can start really going to town on this thing. But these fret slots need to be perfectly straight. If they veer in any way, you're going to start messing with intonation on your guitar. They have to be perfectly spaced as well, because if not, the thing it'll never sound right. It won't be in tune. And like I said, I showed exactly how to figure all this stuff out in the very first video. And then from there you cut these. The depth that you cut them, you want to cut it the depth of the fret tang plus just a little bit more, because what we're going to end up doing is after all the fret slots are cut and this is glued, you're going to radius the fretboard. And then after you radius the fretboard, the sides of it are going to basically be shorter than the center. And the center part of this fret will set inside there just fine, but toward the outside it won't, okay, because it'll have been curved. And so you need to make sure that depth for this fret tang is even all the way across. So many times, even after you're done radiusing, you have to come back in and saw on the edges like this, okay, to make sure that everything is the right depth. And when we get ready to install the frets, I'll go over that a little bit more in depth. But right now, you just need to kind of keep this type of stuff in mind. Just, cut the depth of the fret tang, and go a little bit more, okay? You don't want to go super deep. I mean, you wouldn't want to cut like that deep. That would be just way too much, but I've seen that actually on production guitars where they cut almost all the way through the fretboard. You don't want to do that, okay? You want to give yourself a tight fit, but you also want to give yourself a little bit of working room and a little bit of play to make the job go a lot easier and a lot quicker. So with all of that being said, I'm now going to take this to my jig that I end up making 4 fret slots, and I'm going to cut all my fret slots in here. As soon as my fret slots are cut, then I can go ahead and glue the fretboard to the top of the neck, and after that sets up, we can go ahead and trim it up down the sides. We can radius it and do all this stuff, and I'll go over that here in just a minute. So now that this fretboard has been cut and the fret slots are in, I ended up right here where the nut goes, I ended up cutting that purposely a little deeper because I need to do it to accommodate the nut. You'll see that the fret slots are actually deeper than the tang, and that's so after this is radiused, when that tang goes in on the side of it, because like right now you're going to see that right about there, you're going to see that there's a gap, right? But as soon as this gets radiused, this will be much tighter to the edge. Okay. But what I've done is I've measured the side, the width of this, which is about 2.5 inches. So I went ahead and I did 1.25 inches down here, and I marked 1.25 inches down here, and I'm going to draw a line. We have to find center. You can't just throw this on because by just throwing this on and assuming everything is straight, really what you're doing is you might be putting your frets on at an angle. In other words, it would be the equivalent of like something like this. That's going to mess up your intonation. You want this to be perfect straight line down the center. We have center marked on this, and we have center marked on this, and I'm going to extend this center mark over to the headstock like this. Okay, so that way when I put this on here, I can line, when I put this on here, I can kind of move back and forth and line that up, so that way I know that that's center. And what I'm going to do is down here, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to mark the side of this, flip it over, do my 1.25 inches down here and draw a line, so that way I can make sure that the top portion of this is also lined up with the center of the neck. Okay, just like this. And then when that gets attached here, let me see if you can see that. So when that gets attached here, those two line up. Now I know it's center down here. So that will be center on that line here. This will be center to that line there. And then I know that these are perpendicular to the direction of the neck, which is exactly what we want. This line right here is also going to help us with our fret markers. Okay? And you're going to see that I'm not overly worried about taking stuff off the sides here right now. I'm just going to glue this thing straight on flat like this, and because of the rest of this stuff is going to end up coming off a little bit later. The one thing that I might end up taking off is stuff back here, because there's just no reason for that. I can take that off. It doesn't have to be pretty. I can take that off with a bandsaw or something. But what I'm going to do is making sure that my truss rod is in there nice and neat. It's not sticking up in any way at all. It's not going to be pushing on this. I'm going to line this line that we did earlier up with that portion of the nut slot. And that is going to ensure that we are maintaining our scale length, and everything will still be set up right. So now it's time to go ahead and glue this guy in place. When it comes to using glues on your fretboards and your necks or your bodies or whatever, sometimes you need to change your glues up a little bit depending on what you're using. Now I'm using maple, so I'm just going to stick to what I usually use almost on everything, Titebond 2. Okay, regular Titebond will work as well, and Titebond 3 will work. Okay, Titebond 2 is what I use for the majority of things, but I rarely use regular Titebond. If I'm not using this, I'm using Titebond 3. If you are dealing with a fretboard that has a lot of oil in it, what you're going to have to do is take a rag with some acetone, and you're going to have to, the side that you're gluing, you're going to have to kind of scrub down with this acetone, get that oil out of there, so that way when you actually, put these two together, the glue can adhere to it. If there's too much oil on there, it's not going to adhere. Okay, so keep that in mind. What we're going to do is we're going to put a nice even coat on, but we don't want to put too much. And you have to have a lot of clamps. Okay, if there's one thing that a luthier has probably more than anything else, it's clamps. Tons and tons of clamps. So using a brush here, I'm going through and I am trying to make an even coat all the way down this. I'm not worried about the tape. The tape is going to come up before we actually set the fretboard in place. I'm going a little bit beyond here. And in woodworking, just remember, too much glue is just as bad as too little glue. Okay? If you have a nice even coat and all of your pieces of wood are nice and flat, you won't have any problems. It'll stick just fine and it won't pop up ever. Okay? If you have too much glue, sometimes you can't get a nice tight fit between these two pieces of wood and you'll see the seam a lot more. So what we've got here is good. I'm going to lift up the tape and then I'm going to put the fretboard on it, line it up, and then I'm going to clamp it. So right now I'm lining this fretboard up, making sure that it's center everywhere that I need it to be center. And now it's time to start clamping. But I can't just clamp the top really, because this fretboard is gonna, it's thin, it's not gonna want to set flat. So I'm gonna have to put a large block on top of it and then clamp those to add the extra force, so it's a nice even continuous clamp all the way through it. If I just try to put a clamp like here, here, and here, it's gonna bow this way, it's gonna cup, and you're gonna see gaps, and it's not good. We need this to be nice and super tight. And what I'm going to use is a piece of maple that we had before. Before I put this on, I want to make sure that I can still see this center line. So I'm going to be drawing a line right down there, because after I cover this I won't be able to see it. There's one on the bottom I'll be able to see, but not the one on the top. Okay. So I gently set this here, and I'm going to start with the bottom on down here in order to get this. I want this to be as even clamping as possible, and it's going to want to shift. Okay, so you gotta clamp slow when you first start. After it is set in place, then you can go crazy with the clamps. But right now, you can't. So what I've done is I've gently placed it on there, where I can still kind of shift these things a little bit to make sure that it's centered. Right there is centered. I'm going to give it one more slight turn, and then I'm going to look up here to make sure that this side is correct. And if this side is correct, which it is not, I'm going to shift it over. Just basically like that. As soon as I know that that side's good, I'm going to come down here and look again. We're still good. Okay. Now, this is an important thing. You have to make sure that when you clamp this fretboard down, that the neck is perfectly flat throughout the entire process. If I end up clamping down here, let's say, and this neck has got a slight back bow to it or something, what's going to end up happening is when this fretboard dries, it's going to want to keep it in that shape. So you kind of want to start working your way a certain direction. Now in this case, this is pretty flat, and I'm not really worried about it too much. So the next one I'm going to do is I'm going to put one here in the center, and then I'm going to put one here. Okay, and then from there I'm going to clamp these down really tight, and then go through and start placing some in other spots. Now you don't want to go Superman. Okay, you don't want to clamp too much, because you might actually be spraying out some of the glue, and you're going to have a weak bond. Okay, so you just want to make it where it's tight, where you know that there's some good force. There's good force on it. Now I'm going to put one here. These are good and tight. So now I can turn this on its side, and I want to look down the side of this and see if I can see any gaps anywhere, which I do. I see their hairline gaps, but they're still gaps. And this is where I'm going to come in with my other clamps, maybe like right here, and then start clamping very, very tight to try to get rid of those gaps. Okay. There's one right here. And these, even though it's a hairline gap, it's something that people will see. Okay, so you want to try to make this as tight as you can, no gaps anywhere. Okay, you should see a little bit of glue coming out. Okay, so now that we have all of these clamps on here, which it seems like a lot, but you know, if you want to do this right, you got to have tons of clamps, and it has to be nice and even. This piece of wood on top also is helping to make sure that this neck stays straight during the drying process. You do not want this neck to have any type of curve or twist in it during the time that you're clamping, because by the time you release the clamps, it will stay in that position. Due to the amazing power and magic of video, I'm able to speed up time. Whoa, that thing is on there good. I'm gonna have to release that last. This is dried, so we're gonna start removing all these clamps. Okay, so we're good to go on this. So now what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to turn this upside down. I'm going to take this back to the bandsaw, and I'm going to cut about 1/8 of an inch on both sides of this in order to get this ready for me to actually use the router again. We're dealing with a bolt-on neck where the fretboard extends a little bit beyond the actual neck itself, and that's pretty much why I end up having this slot here to kind of tell me, it's like, hey, you know, don't cut any further back than there with the bandsaw. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to measure out about 3/8 of an inch out here, and I'm going to put a very slight curve to this and get really close to that curve as well with the bandsaw. And that way when I do my routing, this will be perfectly straight, this will be perfectly straight, and then I can just kind of round this edge over with a sander. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to route down the sides of both of these, and I'm going to stop right about here, so that way afterwards I have a straight line that I can actually put a nice flat piece of wood on top of, run the router down, and continue a nice straight line down both sides, because this extends. If I go too far, I'm going to end up damaging this fretboard. Okay, so the type of bit that I'm going to use, once again, is going to be a bit that has a bearing on it. And this particular one has 3 blades to it, but what this does is it's going to run down the neck that we know is flat and straight, and it's going to end up giving us a nice flush edge between the fretboard and the neck. So you'll see what I've done is this now is nice and straight and even, and just a little bit of sanding will take care of the rest of that. When we look down the side of it, there's not much of a seam. That will also, what we can see, will disappear. When we look down the side of it, we'll see that there's not much of a seam. Okay, and when the little bit that we can see will disappear as soon as we start sanding and we finish it. But this now, what I want to do is I want to draw a straight line down both sides. Okay, and I know that this board is very flat because I ran it through the joiner. So I'm going to take this, draw a line there, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to do the exact same thing on this side, just like that. Okay, now that way I know for sure when I cut this, it's going to be perfectly straight and it's going to follow the angle of the neck the way that it's supposed to. I will have to switch router bits in order to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, set it right here. I'm going to put this on the edge of the table on this side, so that way I can actually clamp this instead of having to use double stick tape, because the top of this is not perfectly flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and maybe right around here I'm going to clamp this and to the tabletop, and making sure that this is actually flush with the side of the rest of the fretboard. Okay, and I'm going to be doing the same down here. Okay, and now when I end up taking my router and running it down this in a couple of passes, I want to make sure once again that I'm doing this as cleanly as possible. If I take off too much too quick, I'm risking chip out. It's important that during the time that you're doing any type of woodworking, especially stuff with guitars, don't go by just what it looks like, go by what it feels like. A lot of times something will look right, you start touching it and you realize this is not right. And a guitarist's hands, generally, most people's hands, but a guitarist especially, can pick up a hair difference in something. So everything really has to be perfectly flush and just right. So now we have a really good starting point. We have a really good foundation now for our neck. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cut my little slight curve right here on the bandsaw, get close to it, and then I'm going to do the rest of the shaping just with some sandpaper and keep measuring and looking at it to make sure that all of that is correct before I go to the next step. So now what I want to do is I want to finish this and put my curve on, okay? I'm going to leave the rear of this flat for now because I'm going to end up I'm going to be able to utilize the flatness of that in order to actually put this curve on here. And the way that I do this is going to be with a drum sander and a flat piece of wood that I have run through the joiner to ensure that it's perfectly square and perfectly flat. Okay, so what I need to do is I have my piece of wood here that I have milled so that way I know it's perfectly square and perfectly flat. And I want to take a ruler and I want to measure the distance between the bottom of the drum, okay? And it doesn't really matter right now exactly what that measurement is, just as long as it's something you can remember. Right now it's at 5/8. And I'm going to bring it up here and I'm going to measure it. And I want to make sure that it is at 5/8, okay? It's not quite 5/8. The top is sticking out a little bit, okay? So I'm going to turn this and do it again. I need to make sure that the drum as well as this board are parallel, because if they're not parallel, this is much better. If they're not parallel, when you run your guitar headstock through here, what's going to end up happening is one side's going to be at an angle. It's going to be flat. It's going to look odd. Okay, so and I have this currently at 5/8, the thickness at 5/8, and I'm going to clamp it on both sides of this, and I'm going to do this in passes. Right? I don't want to try to take it all off at once. I want to kind of do it in small increments because it'll make the end result better. And it'll just make the job so much easier. So by holding this, the rear of this, tight against the back of this, when I start running this through, it'll start trimming, it'll start sanding off portions that I'm trying to get rid of. It'll also end up putting that curve in the headstock that I've been looking for. I don't want to push too hard because it'll deform the drum. I can also come in from this side and do the exact same thing, making sure that it's flat against the rear of this, and then shifting this up so that way I can make sure that I sand a nice even straight line. Just like that. That was the first pass, and I was able to give myself a nice curve right there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the distance of this just a little bit, and then I'm going to send it back through again, and it's going to give me a nice even finish. So now I'm going to adjust this and give myself about 1/16 of an inch less than what was there before. I'm going to take off about 1/16 of an inch, And if you're wondering why I'm coming in from this side first instead of the other side, it's because of the direction of the drum. This is going this direction. So by coming in this way, I'll be fighting it, okay? This will want to grab and throw it toward me. If I try to put it in this way and there's too much meat on it, it's going to grab the neck and throw it into this, right? And we don't want that. So we were able to flatten this, take out all those marks from the saw, gave myself a nice curve, and I'm going to finish this off with actually just either hand sanding or a random orbital sander to make this perfectly flat, to get rid of some of the slight round marks that this sander has given. So the finer one was able to get rid of the majority of that too. So now when I start doing my hand sanding to try to make this all feel correct and use my random orbital, all of this will start feeling like factory finish. Okay, so we're on the right track. Everything's going according to plan. You'll also notice with my curve we have access now to the truss rod right there. Okay. So I ran this through the planer just a little bit to try to get this to be perfectly smooth and flat for the next step in the process. And generally what I end up doing now is I put the neck profile on, and the neck profile is the shape of the rear of the back of this. And I usually will use a special router setup with special router bits, and we'll cut mine like that. That way it's always consistent, it's fast, and whatnot. But most people are not going to have access to the stuff that I have in order to do that. So I'm going to show you the old way of doing this, okay? Which works just as well as what I do, but it takes a lot longer. So the first thing that we have to do is we're going to have to figure out, where do we want this neck profile? Where do we want the curve? I mean, this is going to be sitting in a neck pocket, right? So depending on the size of your neck pocket, you're going to have to measure this or set this inside an actual guitar body, mark the rear of it, so that way you know exactly where you need to stop and say, okay, so this is my beginning point, and you have to ask yourself, where do you want your end point to be? Generally what will end up happening is you'll end up having the headstock kind of come in like this, and it'll give you a nice transition between the headstock and the neck profile. Now, if you bring this neck profile way too far up, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up weakening the headstock. So what you want to do is kind of look at where these guys intersect right here, the thin part to the thick, and say, ultimately, I don't want to really go beyond this part right here. And that is why you end up having the curve kind of come in this direction, okay? And by doing that, that's going to ensure that this headstock is very stable and strong. Most people, when they're playing, that's not ever going to get in their way, okay? Because there's not too many people that are going to be barring back here. They're going, if anything, they're going to bar up here. They're going to do chords like this. So this is fine where that is located. You wouldn't want this to go back here, because then it is going to get in the way when you're doing stuff, okay? So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, you don't have to stick with this particular shape of this kind of coming in as a V. You can do it any way you want. You can have it even rounded like this, which I've done many a times. I've got this rounded. This one I might end up rounding as well. It just kind of depends on what I think looks the best and what is going to end up giving it the best strength, or if I'm trying to match something. Many people use what's known as a spoke shave. I use what's known as a draw knife. The draw knife will take out a lot more wood a lot quicker, okay? And when using either a spoke shave or a draw knife, because they're very similar, a spoke shave is more like a hand plane that you can kind of control the depth and stuff, where this just kind of digs out. But when you're using it, you need to be smart about the grain once again. if we look at this, we can see, well, it might be very difficult for you to see. We kind of have grain that's kind of going like this. I'm exaggerating here, okay? But if I end up grabbing, let's say, a piece, some of the grain here, and I start pulling it, it's going to want to, the knife is going to want to follow the weakest part of that grain structure, and it might take too much wood out. So you have to be careful about that. The direction that you pull it is important, okay? Because once again, great example. Let's say we have grain that kind of looks like this, okay? Let's say that this is the direction of the grain right here. If I grab this and I try to pull it from this side, I'm going to end up taking huge chunks out, okay? Because I'm going against the grain. But if I go this direction, I'm going with the flow of the grain, and it's going to be a much smoother, and it's going to a much smoother result. It's going to just look a lot better, and you have to kind of keep that in mind on both sides, okay? So we also have to determine what kind of neck profile do we want. Let's say, now we have a few different types of neck profiles, okay? And what is comfortable for one person is not comfortable for another. I really need to adjust this. A common shape would be a D shape, okay? And this is basically, you have a very even roundness to it. This would be the fretboard, okay? We have what's known as like a C shape, which is kind of like this, okay? Some people like that, some people don't. You'll also find ones where it's kind of like a flat D. You'll find things that are similar to that. You'll find some that even are somewhat rectangular, not rectangular, but triangular in shape, okay? You have to decide what you think is the best shape and what feels comfortable to you. When you're doing this, just keep in mind, you can always take more wood off, but you can't add it. So, you know, after you work it for a little bit, pick the neck up, feel it. Does it feel right to you? Does it need to have, does it feel too thick? Does it have to have more taken off? Is the shape not quite right? Is it smooth? This kind of stuff, okay? So you need to know what you're going to be doing as far as the neck profile. There is no right or wrong. It's preference, guys. It's preference. How thick should it be? Okay. Generally speaking, when you throw your ruler up here, okay, if you look at this, from point A to point B is about 1 1/8 inches. If I come here, it's about 1 1/8 inches, okay? That is too thick of a neck, okay? If I ended up coming over here and I started saying, well, I'm only going to take this much off right here of the neck, for many people that would be considered too thick of a neck still, okay? What I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say that I'm going to go 7/8 heavy. This is as far as I'm going to end up taking it. That's the thickness of the neck when everything is said and done. From outside to outside, it's going to be this size. We also have to remember, we have a truss rod inside here, okay? The truss rod goes down about 3/8 of an inch, okay, which is about right here, okay, from the top. It goes down about 3/8 of an inch. You have to make sure that you give yourself enough wood down here so that way the truss rod still can function. If it becomes too thin, you might actually cut into the truss rod cavity. If you cut your truss rod cavity too deep, you'll definitely go into it, okay? And if it's also, if you get too thin, what ends up happening is sometimes if you try to tighten the truss rod, it'll actually break and snap the rear of the neck in just that area where the channel is. So you have to make sure you give yourself enough wood in that area. And I think that this particular distance right here will make for a nice feeling neck, okay? And also keep in mind, we're going to be radiusing this. And when we radius it, we're going to lose part of this fretboard. We're going to probably lose this much. So the end result is going to be actually be from here to here for the thickness. But when people measure, they usually measure from here to dead center. Once again, it's up to you. There's different thicknesses of different necks. An Ibanez neck is much thinner than like an old school Fender neck, right? Or an old school Gibson neck. So it's preference. And you're just going to end up having to keep whittling away on this until it feels right to you. As soon as it feels right, then you know that it is right. There really is no right or wrong as long as it feels okay. So in order to start the process, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my neck here and I'm going to clamp it to the table, or whatever you have available that you can clamp things to. Whatever you clamp it to, you have to make sure you have a very strong anchor to it, because you're going to be pulling on this. Now, the sharper the blade is and the smaller pieces you take off, the easier this will be, okay? But now we have a good anchor to this table. This thing shouldn't shift. And when I come in with my draw knife, let me move this so you can actually see this stuff a little bit better. When I come in with my draw knife, I can start pulling wood away from this, okay? And at first, I'm going to be taking off pretty big chunks. Something like this, okay? And I might do the same thing on the other side. And if you are using a spoke shave, you're going to see that it's going to take a little bit longer, but you won't be taking off as much material as I am taking off. But I'm going to keep basically working on this, and it takes a while. This is the old way of doing it, but I'm going to keep working on this until I get to a point where I feel I can start using files, I can start using sandpaper. I can start using all sorts of things in order to really finish the product. But as of this point, it's all about trying to get a nice chunk of this wood off to make the job a lot easier. When you're doing this, be very conscious of what is happening with the grain. Does it look like it's wanting to go in further and like take a bigger chunk out than you want? If so, change the direction that you're going. Okay? So basically, it would be just like this, and I'd keep working on it until it gets to a point where I can start sanding and start filing. And I'm not going to sit here and work on this for hours just for the sake of the video. You get the point on this. This is how it's done, though. And there's many people that still do it this way. Maple is the hardest to work with, right? But if you had a piece of mahogany or something, you could go through it much faster than going through a piece of maple like this. Another tip that you can do is you can get something like this, a piece of cardboard or whatever, use a compass, do something, draw a perfect neck profile on it, cut that out, cut this, and you keep dropping it on here until it matches that. And then that way you know that you've matched that profile. One of the things that you can do, if you already have a profile that you like, let's say we have a neck and we already have a profile that we like on it. We can actually get a gauge like this. You can get these at Home Depot, Lowe's, or anywhere. And what you can do is just take this, drop it down the side of it, okay, pull it up, and now you've got your profile, you have your neck, and you can keep just kind of putting this and checking to make sure that you're matching what's happening here to here, okay? This is something you can't really go too fast with unless you have specialized tools like the ones that I have. But if you're not doing this for a living, there's no reason to really have these specialized tools. And many people like working on necks like this and just keep whittling away, using files and rasps and stuff. It's enjoyable to them. It's comforting. They like doing it. Me personally, I don't like that. Right? It's a lot of work, but it does work. That's the old way of doing it. Many people still do it that way. So it's not something that is kind of like, oh my God, this is horrible. Not really. It's the classical way of doing it. But let's talk a little bit about the quality of the tools that you use. Okay. Now this draw knife it broke and it's old and everything like that. I think I spent about 70 something dollars for this, okay? And I need to sharpen it soon. I always have to sharpen that. You might be able to find a spoke shave or something at somewhere like Home Depot or Lowe's or something for maybe $12, $15. Chances are the blade in it is not going to be sharp enough, right? A really good spoke shave at a place that only sells woodworking materials, like somewhere like Rockler or somewhere online that only sells woodworking gear made for cabinet makers, made for professionals, you're going to find a much better quality product. You're going to spend money on it though. Okay, I mean, a good spoke shave might run you $80, $90, right? But you know you've got a quality tool. You won't be suffering, during the process of shaping your neck. You just have to ask yourself, do you want to go cheap and make it really hard and also, risk the chance of, damaging what you've already done? Or do you want to get a good tool that makes your job very easy and accurate? You kind of have to choose between that. I've got very, very large bits, and, you can get these specially made. The majority of people are not going to have a setup where they can actually end up using something like that in order to do their necks. Now, if you already have that setup, I really don't need to tell you how to do it then, right? Because if you have that type of gear, chances are you already know how to use it, right? But this is the way you do it. You can also take a wood rasp to this to take off a lot of this material. If you have a belt sander, you can use a belt sander. Try to take off as much as you can and then start shaping it and being a little bit more careful with everything. Keep checking it. Keep checking it. And but when you get to a certain point, you're going to know, okay, from here I need to start using sandpaper to do the final touches of it. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to keep working on it like this. I was just showing you that's how most people do it that don't have the special gear. I'm going to take this and I'm going to run it through my router to put the curve on, and the router doesn't do everything. There's going to be little portions I still have to do with a draw knife, and I'm going to show you how I do that. I mean, I'll be doing this portion with a draw knife, and I'll be doing down here with a draw knife. I'll also be using different types of files, rasps, sanders, and stuff like that. So the only part that you're going to have to kind of force through, guys, and girls, is just doing it like this to try to get the majority of the wood off, and then everything else you'll see. I pretty much have to do the same thing that you have to do down here, but the majority of the hard work I let the machines do.
Okay, to give you an idea on how I go about using the router with a large router bit that's specifically designed just for cutting this, which you can get custom router bits made. You just have to contact people that make custom router bits and give them the details, and they'll make it for you. But what I do is I put a piece of double stick tape on here. This has got to be perfectly flat. From here I have a jig that I have made that basically makes it where I can run this through, and it keeps my fingers away from that router bit, because when you're dealing with a large router bit, you have to go at a fairly slow pace, but it can be dangerous. It can grab and throw. So you have to constantly be thinking about safety. So you'll see here what's going to end up happening is it'll start cutting right about here, down here on the bottom. And it'll have a nice slow gradual cut in. This will go through, and when I get to about right here, I actually remove it. Okay, I don't allow this to continue down because it would cut too deep into this. And I have a line right here that tells me where to stop. And I just kind of bring this out, and then I shape the rest of this later on down the line with my other tools. So let me go ahead and show you one pass, and then I'll go ahead and finish this up and then show you the rest of the finishing of the profile. You just have to make sure you go really slow. You got to keep these things as sharp as you can keep them, and be really aware of what's going on with the wood. You can tell by the way it feels, the way it sounds, and things like that. And now you'll see I've got a nice curve to this, and it stops right about here, right where the fretboard begins. And then this I'm actually going to end up finishing off by hand and giving a slight roundness right there. So that way you don't feel this edge. But and you can adjust this, right? I mean, you can have this could actually set a little bit more flush, and this will curve up a little bit more. But I'm trying to avoid that. And if this was perfectly flush, this curve would go all the way up to the very, very tip of the fretboard here. And that can feel a little strange sometimes. So I try to keep it like that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this around, do the same thing to the other side. And you're going to see that what I've got here, I stopped, let me back up. You're going to see that I stopped right when this edge of the blade was at this line, because I need to make sure I don't get into the area that the portion that will be sitting into the neck pocket will be affected. And it's the same thing up here. I have this starting and stopping right about this area. All this portion gets taken care of with like a spoke shaver or a draw knife, and same thing with up in these areas. So now that I've got a really good base for this, and I've got the majority of this rounded, I just have to kind of take this out, start shaping this and shaping this, and the rear of my neck is going to be perfect. And then this portion I'm just going to end up sanding to give a gradual edge so it doesn't feel so sharp. So you see I'm back in the original position that I was talking about. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start shaping this. And I'm going to do this slowly. I want to make sure that everything is right. I don't want to dig too deep. This wood is finished. So everything, any mark that you make that's wrong, it's going to be seen. So you have to take your time and be very, very intentional with every one of your moves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue working on this, and I'm going to turn the camera off because it'll be boring just to watch me do this for about 30 minutes to 45 minutes, trying to get it roughly shaped to exactly how I want it. And then when it's time for me to start using things like files and sanders, I'll show you what the next step is. But I can't stress this enough, you need to take your time with this and try not to get carried away, because it's real easy to mess up your neck, and if this is all going to be exposed, you can't have that. So I've gotten this down pretty far, and in order to take a lot of this other stuff off, I'm going to end up using an orbital sander here with 80 grit. And there's actually another sander I use, another tool, but once again I'm trying to keep this where with some basic tools you can do this at home. So I'm going to show you a way that you can do it. Now 80 grit and an orbital sander will eat away this wood quite quickly, and I don't want to get it to the exact shape. I want to get it close so that way I can switch over to 220, sand out the rest, and that way it's not going to leave any sanding marks. When using your sander, generally you're going to end up using like this section of the sander in these areas to try to get the rough shape. You can go way too much too quick, so make sure that you keep it at a low setting and take your time. Don't sit there and just go absolutely crazy with it, because you're going to end up messing up your neck. Now what you're going to see me do here in a second is I'm going to actually end up using the curve of the sander to give me a shape right down, let me move my hand, a shape right down here. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing over here, and I'm going to allow the sander to give me that shape. Now in this area, that's as far as I want to go with this. I don't want to use a sander any more than that. I wanted to get the majority of it out. This section right here, I'm going to actually end up using the draw knife, and I'm going to take a very slim cut away in order to give this a nice, even, straight edge down both sides. Okay, so now that I have a pretty good straight edge down both sides like this, when I do my 220, it'll make things look a lot sharper and nicer. This will all be taken care of. So now I'm going to take this and I'm going to flip it around, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other end. Now, when I set this inside the strap body, I drew a line right where it hit. That's actually not where I want this to stop. What I actually want is this to kind of go like this. Okay, that gives me a little bit of extra room depending on whatever whatever body this goes into. Gives me a little bit of more strength in this area. It also allows me to have a little bit more of a gradual tie into here, a little bit better of a fade. But just like before, I'm going to end up using my draw knife, and I'm going to be using this to take out huge chunks. I want to get this down to an acceptable level, and then as soon as I get to that acceptable level, I'm going to use the sander again. One thing to keep in mind, the way that I'm holding this knife right now, and I'm going this way, I have to be very careful. I have to keep this under complete control. If I'm going this direction and it slips, and if I take a chunk out of this, I can't hide that, right? It's going to be there. So I have to be very, very cautious and in full control over this knife at all times. So I've gotten down kind of far on this, and I'm going to show you a couple of tools that you can use to help you with this process. Now, this is what's known as a micro rasp. Okay, you can hook up to any drill. You can get these at cabinet supply stores, like where they sell tools and materials for cabinet makers. Hook it up to your drill, okay, and it'll help remove a lot of this wood. As well as give you a rounded finish. You can also come in with files, okay, to try to round this stuff off, to take a lot of the bulk of the wood off. And you'll notice the file I'm using here, it's not that aggressive of a file. And after you get it roughed out, just like I did there, we go back to our sandpaper with 80 grit. So now that this is pretty well shaped and it's really close to how I want it, now I'm going to do the final finishing of this and the final shaping of this with 220 grit. And the way that I'm going to do that is I have to do it by both the way that it looks, but also the way that it feels. And when it comes to a guitar neck, the way it feels is extraordinarily important. So I'm going to keep running my hand back and forth down the back of it to make sure that everything feels right. There's a nice transition, everything's even. I'm going to look at it, make sure that everything is also symmetrical, it's centered. We still got a couple little lines right here from the router. Okay, I got to come in here with 220 to kind of make these cuts that I did, these cuts right here that I did, a little bit nicer. Okay, and I'm also going to take the 220. I'm going to do the top of this. I'm going to do the rear of it. I'm going to hit the sides gently as well. I don't want to go too much with the sides. If I go too much with the sides, this can become a loose fit, right? And if I hit the sander too much right here, it can also end up causing, if you were to eyeball down the side of it, you would see this wave, which is no good. So now I'm going to switch to 220. And the 220 grit will also get rid of any of the sanding marks from the 80 grit. So I've hit this once with 220, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep running my hand back and forth over it, running my thumb over areas like this where I can feel flat and sharp edges, like here, here, here. This area feels pretty good. So most of the work is going to be in this area and right down the side here. And when using an orbital sander, going back and forth is fine, but keep in mind that has a tendency to leave kind of like these streaks of flat edges. So every now and then, move the sander like this to kind of knock those down. So I've got a pretty good feel on this right now, and I went ahead and I took a sander to the rest of the neck, trying to get the majority of the marks and stuff off. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go by hand, and I'm going to be sanding the rest of this by hand. And the way that I want to do this is I want to try to put that curve back on that might have been damaged during the time that I was using the orbital, and also take any high spots. So I take some 220 grit and I'm going to lay it over the top of this, and I'm just going to end up bringing this back and forth just like this, and this will help put that curve back on and make everything feel symmetrical. It'll feel right. Sometimes you'll feel a high spot or a low spot, and you'll have to come in with your sandpaper like this, okay? But ultimately, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make this feel perfect, right? It should look good, but it should also feel good. And one of the things about necks on a guitar body is you will be sanding for a very long time on this if you want it to be right. Okay, this feels good. Okay, now that this has been sanded into the shape that I want and everything's about right, let me show you something about woodworking, especially with necks and things like this. You can't keep this edge sharp, okay? So what you end up doing is you want to knock it down, take some sandpaper, hold it at an angle, and give it a few passes like this, okay? What this will do is it'll help with the finishing process, but it also makes it where the neck will not want to chip or split or splinter on these edges as much.
So now what we're going to do is we are going to radius this. And the tool that I actually use to radius this, I built a tool for it so I can radius it quickly, and I can also radius it where it is extremely accurate. But you don't have to have that tool. You can use a radius block, and a radius block, you can buy these at places like StuMac and other places like that. Sometimes you can find them on eBay and stuff. And these radiuses come in different measurements. This particular one is a 12-inch radius. And a 12-inch radius basically means if this is 0 mark, you come out 12 inches and then you draw a circle from that. That's the radius of the top of the fretboard. Now, what radius should you use on yours? It's a preference thing, really. Generally speaking, when you end up having something that's like a 9-inch radius, which is not uncommon for something like a fender neck, it makes it where it's more comfortable to hold. When you start getting into things like 12, which is more like Gibson, it's going to be comfortable, but it's also going to give you a certain advantage I'll talk about here in a second. And you'll also sometimes have to do a radius based on the bridge that you're using. A Floyd Rose bridge, something that you can't really adjust the radius on it, is 14 inches. So it forces you to use a 14-inch radius. There's some guitars that have a 16-inch radius, and then they'll use a Floyd Rose bridge as well. You know, an inch here, an inch there on the radius isn't going to affect things too badly. And sometimes what you'll end up actually having is what's known as a compound radius, where maybe down here is 9, and then up here might be like 14 or something, and you tie the two together when you're radiusing it. Now, a very tight radius, like 9-inch, 8-inch or something like that, might feel comfortable, but it forces you to have higher action, because when you get ready to start doing bends, because the radius is so tight, a lot of times the fret will actually fret out during the bend because of the radius being so tight, right? So it forces you to have higher action. When you have things like 12s, 14s, 16s, you don't deal with that as much, and you can get a lot lower action. So the way that we're going to do this, now we could put our frets in now. We could put our fret markers in right now. Not our frets, but our fret markers. We could do that right now and then radius it. Generally, I do that a little bit later. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to radius it beforehand. And you just take your radius block, making sure that you've got some sandpaper on it that's rough, that can take off a lot of meat. This is going to take a little bit of time. Adjust your truss rod so that way when you put a straight edge on it, this neck is perfectly flat and straight. You don't want to radius this if this neck is not perfectly flat and straight, okay? And from here, what you would end up doing is you start just getting your radius block and running it down the length of this, okay? And you're gonna keep doing this over and over and over until you have a perfect radius. And how are you gonna know that you have a perfect radius? Well, you can get a pencil or chalk and mark the fretboard like this. When those marks disappear, that means sandpaper is hitting it, and that means it has been radiused, okay? After you get to the point where you're almost at the radius you want, switch the sandpaper to something like 220 once again, and then go back and forth over it. After that is done, once again, you need to check it to make sure that everything is straight and flat and you don't have humps, okay? And afterwards, if you do have a couple of low spots and high spots, and you'll be able to tell once again with the pencil or with chalk, from there you can use a sanding beam. This is a sanding beam, and this has been precision ground. You can buy these at places like StuMac and stuff, once again, sometimes online. And then from there, you would take this and go back and forth over the radius, following the radius, and then this will make it perfectly flat, okay? Now, this is something I can't emphasize enough again, and that is a perfectly radiused and flat fretboard will help you with your fretting so much. It'll make it where you don't really have to do too much fret work. After you install your frets, the amount that you actually have to take off and recrown will be minimal, if any. If you don't do a very good job, you are going to end up having to level your frets and recrown them considerably. The better your fretboard is, okay, the nicer your frets are going to be. Keep that in mind. Take your time with this. Don't rush through it. When you've got your 60 grit or your 80 grit down here, this area you're going to see is going to require a lot more sanding, okay, than this section. So, you know, after you end up doing this a few times, don't you know, think you can't stay down here for a second or two going like that, just like this, okay? Because this is going to take more sanding than this portion of it. The important thing is it's even. Every now and then, turn it on its side. Look at the fretboard thickness and make sure that you're not working one area more than another. Also make sure that this section right here is not real fat, because if it's real fat, that means that the neck is bending during the process, okay? Or the truss rod is too tight and you've got a forward bow in it, okay? So keep an eye on all this stuff. You want this to be perfectly flat and you want to have the radius that you want. If you're going to be doing a compound radius, what you do is you do this, the portion that you say, this area I want 8 or I want 9, okay? And then from there you take the higher one and you come in here and you blend those two, okay, together. And you know, you can have 8 right here, 12 here, 14 here, 16. It doesn't make a difference. Just make sure that during the time you're doing it, you're blending these guys, and then you finish it once again with the sanding beam to make them continuous. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to radius this, and after I'm done radiusing it, we'll put the fret markers in. So I've radiused this, and afterwards I took my straight edge and I placed it on top to make sure I didn't see any light between these guys. Okay, everything's good. If I saw a little something that was uneven, I would take my sanding beam and I'd go back and forth over it just like this to make sure everything was perfectly level. Okay. So now we're going to put the fret markers in. To do the fret markers, we're going to have to figure out center again on this. So I'm going to be measuring down here, right at that last fret, 57.5, divide that in half. I'm going to put a line, do the same thing up here, boom. After I make my line, we go to the next step. So now it's time to go ahead and start getting ready to drill out the holes and all this other stuff. I've marked center, I've drawn a line, then I went through and I wrote down, you know, exactly where each one of these goes. Okay, 3, 5, 7, 9, 12, 15, 17, 19, 21, 24 if you have a 24-inch, 24 fret neck. Down the side of this, I've taken a pencil and found about center of the fretboard, and I just kind of dragged it down this way so that way I know I'm even. Okay, and I've also marked center on all of these to where I'm going to be putting the side dots. And the way that we can go ahead and make sure that these fret markers are in the right spot, we have center, but we need to kind of get them center also between each one of the frets. Now you can take your micrometer and measure, divide in half, and do it like that, which is very accurate. Or you can get something like this, which is a, well, this is just a flimsy nut ruler that I'm going to be using. And I go from corner to corner, grab my pencil, and I drag it down like that. That's my dead center. Now on the 12, that's not really going to work very well, simply because I have to put 2 there, but this can actually help me find the center. So I'm going to do it anyway, and then just measure with the micrometer there to see what we got. So now that I have all of these marked, what I want to do is, this actually is a tool that I've made to help me actually with the tuning machines to make sure that I always drill dead center. And where is a template that I can show you? On a template like this, I already have the holes drilled out to the exact size and location of where I need them. So when I lay this on top of my piece of wood that I'm using for my my neck, I can get this, it fits snugly inside there. I can give it a tap and it leaves a hole dead center where I need to put my drill bit.
It helps the drill bit go in exactly where I want it to go, and it helps me actually see it as well. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it dead center on these and just give it a hit, just like that, okay? And what this does is it makes sure that every one of these is going to go exactly where it belongs. If you end up drilling these even a hair off, people will notice. People will notice that. So it's important that, you know, you prep your work very well so that way everything is dead center. So now that I have indentations in all of these and all these, we're actually ready to drill. So what kind of drill bit do you want to use? You want to use a brad point like this. It's got a little tip on the very edge of it, and these are very sharp, okay? But this will go right inside that little indentation that I made, and it'll make an extraordinarily clean hole, and it'll be perfect. If you use something that's like a typical drill bit that's rounded over on the end, you're really asking for a bad cut, as well as you're going to go too deep and it'll have a tendency to walk. Use brad points any chance you get when you are building a guitar for everything, okay? Problem is when you start getting into a very, very small drill bit, they don't make brad points that small. And we're going to be using this for these right here, but this is why it's important to have a little indentation for this guy to set in and you know, go in straight. When it comes to fret markers, you can purchase these things from all sorts of places, and it comes in different materials. For instance, we have like abalone right here, okay? Here's another one. This is turquoise, okay? Of course, for things like fenders and maple necks, a lot of times people just use black plastic, okay? Here is mother of pearl, okay? There's all different types. As far as the side dots, they also come in certain measurements. This is abalone, right, for the side dots. Turquoise. You can also get special inlay that has different shapes or whatever, that you can do whatever you want with it. Make your own thing. Here's mother of pearl, okay? These actually are for a custom guitar I'm building for someone that are cubic zirconia, and purple ones, as well as just a regular clear type, and just some more stuff. Now this is kind of like a little spare box of inlay material that I try to use this stuff up before I go into my other stuff, because if I have, you know, might as well. So on this one, per usual, as a fender neck, I'm going to be using black plastic, and this is also black plastic I'm going to be using for the edges. And then these you just kind of jam in the hole afterwards and cut them off, okay? What we're going to be using to put these in is super glue, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this to my drill press, and I'm going to drill all of the holes that I need. And I don't want to drill this to the exact depth of the fret marker. I want to have this fret marker stick up a little bit, okay? You don't want to go too deep. You want to have the fret marker stick up just a hair, so when you go over and you re-radius it to sand those tops down, there's enough up there that will give you that radius, okay? If you have it too deep, it's always going to have this flat spot right there, unless you put a whole lot of super glue, which you don't want to do. You want the fret marker to be exposed. So I'm going to take this to the drill press, I'm going to drill these out, and when I come back, I'll actually start installing them. One thing I forgot to do is show you about the 12th fret. While I was drilling this, I realized it, okay? So what I've done is I come over here with my micrometer, use the edge of the fret slot as a means to determine where that's going to be. I come over here, mark that, come over here, mark that, draw a straight line between these two, okay? And then from here, I can just come up with almost any number that I want to find the two spots that I'm going to be drilling. So there'll be one there, and there'll be one there. And then I do the exact same thing as I did before. Just like that. So all the holes are drilled, and what I want to do now is take some sandpaper and gently rub it over the tops of these holes to try to knock down any pieces of maple that were cut but didn't really come off very well. So that way they don't get in the way when I try to lower the fret marker inside the hole. And sometimes you have to take an X-Acto knife to trim those things off. And super glue can set up pretty fast sometimes, so you want to do this like just one at a time. You know, it doesn't hurt to test fit or whatever. And you want to put, whoa, that's a little too much. You want to put enough to cover it, as well as enough to make sure it goes up the sides of your fret marker. And you see how this is sticking out? There's more than enough fret marker material in this hole. I don't have to worry about it being too thin. And these holes are a very good size. They're not too small, and they're not too large, which is exactly what we're looking for. Any super glue that comes out of these holes will be sanded off when we sand the tops of the fret markers. So now that that's done, and these guys are wedged in there really well and they're glued, I'm going to take my radius block again, and I'm going to go over the tops of these guys in order to get them flush to the top of the fretboard. And since this is plastic, it'll go pretty quick. So those have been sanded, and I'm going to notice that there's a couple of spots that look like it could use a little bit of extra glue down the sides. That's fine. And there's also going to be little areas that look like it needs to be sanded to take away any extra super glue. And you'll notice though, I'm not going crazy with this. I don't want to mess up my radius. All of those are good now. So now I can go ahead once again with my sanding beam, just to make sure that everything is flat. And it's also important to keep in mind that every time you do this, you have to flatten your neck with the truss rod if it's required. When you put your straight edge down, it's got to be flat. If you do this when the truss rod has got any tension on it, what you're going to end up with is an unlevel, uneven fretboard. So these fret markers are in. We're good. Now it's time for the side. And the side, we're going to be pretty much doing something very similar to this. So now with the side fret markers, I'm going to put a drop of glue inside the hole. Doesn't require a lot. Whoops, that was a lot. Let me remove some of that. Just makes it easier for me to sand later. And now I'm going to take the rod and I'm going to jam it in here. This one has been deformed, so I have to cut this. And after I get this jammed in there, let me wipe up a little bit more of this glue. I'm going to hit it with accelerant. As soon as I know that it sets up a little bit, I'm going to take my razor and I'm going to cut this just like that, and I'm going to continue doing this all the way down it. So now that I have all of these guys in, it's time to go ahead and sand these down just like I did before. And you can use your sanding beam just like this to make sure that everything is nice and even. You can use some 220 and just come in here, and as soon as you see that thing being flush, back away from it. Do not overwork it because you'll misshape the
the neck profile, and they'll be able to feel it, or you will be able to feel it when you're playing. So this is nice and smooth, it's flat, it's radiused, it's ready to roll. And before I actually fret this particular one, the customer asked me to antique it, to make it look aged. So we've gotten to the point now where this guy is ready to actually be fretted. Now, the truth is do you absolutely need all the stuff I'm about to show you to do a fret job? The answer is no, but the more tools that you have that are specialized just for fretwork, and the more accurate they are, the better fret job you're going to end up completing. And it's all about the end result being, you know, a quality fret job, something that feels very good, something that's very accurate, it looks nice. It's something that's going to last for a long time. You're not going to have frets popping out and things like that. So what are we going to need? Well, we're going to need some fret wire. And on this particular neck, we're going to go with something that's a little bit larger than what you might see on a vintage type of Fender style neck. But this fret wire comes with different measurements. I'm going to see if I can put this in a way that you can actually see what I'm talking about. If you were to look at it from the very tip here, it would look kind of like a mushroom, where you have a top that's kind of rounded over like this, and then you have a tang that sticks down. Now the tang, it does come in different thicknesses and it comes in different lengths. The top comes in different widths, it also comes in different heights, okay? Now the question is which one is best for you or for your customer? The reality is it's preference. A lot of the stuff that happens on a guitar is all about preference. Now, there is a general rule of thumb, and that is higher fret wire requires the player to have a lighter touch, okay? Because with the fret wire being very tall, if you were to fret, you would increase the chance of the note going a little sharp, right? If you push a little too hard. So if somebody has very light, a light touch, and they're very fluid over that fretboard, generally a very high fret wire will be just fine. They'll actually prefer that. For vintage wire that's much shorter and thinner, that's better for people that have a very strong, heavy hand. That they really grip that fretboard. That will help it make sure that it doesn't go a little sharp when you're playing. But it really is all about preference. Sometimes if you're doing a refret, you have to get a fret wire that has a thicker tang, because after you end up taking the frets out, a lot of times this fret slot will be slightly damaged, or through time it's expanded and contracted, maybe it's a little too wide, and it forces you to use a larger tang. So when you're ordering your fret wire, you need to kind of know what size fret slots you're planning on putting in, and they need to be in proper relation to the fret wire. Now this is EVO fret wire, and EVO fret wire doesn't have any nickel in it. This is basically a copper tin alloy. It's the same thing that's used in eyeglasses. It's hypoallergenic. There's a lot of people now that are becoming nickel sensitive, and it forces them where they can't play the guitar anymore because they start breaking out in blisters and they're in extreme pain. Now, the EVO is much stronger than nickel fret wire. Nickel fret wire can dent quite easy. It wears out quickly. But it is the standard. It's cheap, it's easy to work with, and that's pretty much why people use it. This has no nickel in it. This is much harder than that. Then you have things like stainless steel, and stainless steel is much harder to work with. Now stainless steel does have nickel in it, but because it's so hard, you don't really have to worry about your nickel sensitivity with it, even though there is nickel in it. And I guess once again it depends also on how bad the sensitivity is. But stainless steel is very durable. It lasts forever. EVO lasts for a long time. What is going to determine whether this wears out a lot or not is how much the person plays, how much they bend, how much they do bends and stuff, as well as the type of strings that they use. Basically, it's like this. You have nickel guitar strings that are wound. So essentially, it's almost like a file, okay? And then you have a nickel alloy for a fret. Now, the nickel alloy for a fret is in different ratios, right? Every brand makes it a little bit different. There's different ratios. There's some that are very cheap and there's some that are very good. And the same thing happens with strings. But if the string is wound and it's kind of shaped like a little bit like a file, okay, and it is harder, its alloy is slightly harder than the fret it's going to wear. It would be the equivalent of taking a file like this and running it over a piece of wood. Which one's harder, right? Because the one that's harder is going to resist the damage more than the softer one, right? So the wood would be the thing that actually you would end up seeing get damaged. And it's kind of the same principle. What's going to determine whether your frets are going to go bad quickly or they're going to wear out all has to do with the type of strings you use and also the kind of frets you use and the alloy, the ratios that they use. If you use things like stainless steel strings on a nickel fret wire, the fret wire is going to wear out before the strings do, right? And these are things that you have to kind of keep in mind. If you see somebody that wears their frets down a lot, you have to ask them, you know, why are we constantly having to do fret work on your guitar? You know, and you look at the strings and you realize, this is a problem. Also, there's a lot of luthiers out there that will use really cheap fret wire, and the stuff just dents real easy, and it ends up wearing. I will avoid using nickel unless somebody specifically asks for it. Everything I do is EVO. You know, it lasts longer, it feels better, hypoallergenic, it's just better. So that's pretty much all I have to really say about fret wire on this. They generally will come in a few different sizes. You know, some people will call the very small, thin fret wire like vintage wire. That's what I generally will call it. Then they have some for, you know, the size for like maybe like bass. Then you know you have jumbo, super jumbo. You have medium. There's all these different things. You just have to kind of ask yourself what you want and what you think is going to work best for your playing style or for the person that is going to be playing the guitar. So a luthier really does need to ask questions and not just assume something. The second thing that we're going to need is we're going to need certain hand tools. Okay, we're going to need a good set of horizontal dikes, and these horizontal dikes, I've actually taken a grinder to the face of them so I can get closer to the neck body when I'm cutting. Okay, so you need a good set of these. This is a fret tang nipper, and what this does is this one is actually one that I made myself. This is actually what they use. You can get this at places like Radio Shack and stuff, and they use these for computer cases. They might call it a tang nipper, not a tang nipper, like a sheet metal nipper or something like that. And it's usually made for like computer cases and things along those lines. But what I've done is I've taken a Dremel and I've ground a slot in it right there, so that way I can stick my fret wire in it. Let me give you an example here. Let me cut off a small piece of this. Now fret wire comes, by the way, in different lengths. Sometimes it comes in sticks. I buy it in rolls. I buy it in 100-foot rolls. But basically you would end up having your tang right here. You slip it in like that, okay? And then now when I push down on this, it'll cut the tang off, okay? You see that? And there's a reason for this, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But that's what that's for. Is it required? Not really, but it makes a nicer, neater product. You know, there's some people that will use a file, and then they'll cut the tang off. Some people will first end up, you know, using their snips to cut a piece like this, then get a file to finish it off. You don't have to have all these tools. You can always do it a very old-fashioned way. Okay. You're going to need some type of hammer to go ahead and pound the frets in. This is a jeweler's hammer, and you can get these all over the place, fairly cheap, $6 maybe or less. This one I think I got at Harbor Freight Tools years ago, and I saw it and I'm like, well, this is perfect for my fret because it's got brass right here, which will sooner take the dent than something like the EVO, and it's also got plastic here. It's lightweight. This is good. But sometimes when I'm dealing with a very, a fretboard that doesn't want to cooperate, I have to use something that's a little bit more meaty, and a simple ball peen hammer will work. You're going to need some saws to make sure that the fret slots are cut to the correct depth, and also help kind of clean them out sometimes. And these types of saws I get at my woodworking supply company, and I buy these to make sure that they have the proper tooth per inch. You want something that's fine. You don't have to be too crazy about it and be but it needs to be fine. And you need to make sure that you know what the thickness is of these guys, because these have to be in correct relation to the thickness of the tang of the fret right here. Okay, it has to be in relation to that. If you get a knife if you get a saw that's much too large, this will not grab into the fret slot, and then it'll force you to alter the way that the tang is, which there's tools that you can do that. We're not going to get into that in this video. That has more to do with like guitar repair later on down the line with vintage stuff, but that will alter the tang. Or what you're going to end up having to do is use a lot of super glue and have these perfectly radiused, or you're going to have to get a different fret wire. Okay, if it's too thin, the fret will not want to go inside very well. It'll want to resist it, and it'll also end up putting a large back bow on the neck, right? Because it's going to keep bending and forcing the neck back, and by the time everything is said and done, right now this is perfectly flat, it would have a huge curve. We have to expect to see a little bit of a curve, a little bit of a back bow after we're done fretting. Doesn't always happen. If you have the proper gauge saws, and you in relation to the frets, and you have everything cut correctly, it doesn't always happen. And if there is a slight one, we're dealing with something very slight. Maybe something on both sides. If you put a straight edge, maybe something along the lines of a couple of business cards or something very, very minor. That's satisfactory. But make sure you know what the gauge is of your hand saws. These are not really too expensive. Now you can buy these types of saws from places like STUMAC and LMI and stuff that already have the proper gauge. Because you're buying from a specialty company, you're going to be spending a little bit more. I can get something like this for $10 locally, okay? Where if I go to one of the other places, that sells just guitar stuff, I might spend $20, $25. So, there's nothing wrong with using things that are not name brand or whatever, or not specifically designed for guitar usage. Numbers are numbers, teeth are teeth. Don't get caught up in that, okay? So we need that. We're going to need super glue, and this is to help hold the frets in, so that way later on down the line they don't want to kind of pop out. Sometimes you're also going to end up getting a fret that is not wanting to cooperate, and it forces you to kind of clamp it down with some super glue in order to achieve the bind that you need. Now, this is something that I know everybody can't get. All right, now this is a syringe. Now, because I have multiple sclerosis, I give myself shots every day, and this typically is what's considered biohazard. I'd get rid of it in a biohazard box, but what I usually do is clean it out, and I cut the sharp end off of the syringe, and then I use this for my super glue. I'll pour super glue in here, put this back in, the plunger back in, bring it back up until it's nice and tight, and then now I can get into my fret slots very accurately with super glue, and I don't have to worry about it getting all over the finish out here. Okay. Now you don't have to have this. Okay. But it does help a little bit. Some people will put 2 pieces of electric tape on each side of the fret, and then they'll put the super glue in, and then they'll take the tape off. To me, it seems like a lot of work. If you don't have a finish on it, and it's just like plain rosewood or plain ebony or something like that, you can squirt a little bit of super glue in it, and then take a rag that's got acetone immediately after and wipe up the rest of the super glue. Later on, when you buff your frets, and oil the board, all that disappears and it looks very nice. This is a block that I made years ago, and what this is this has a broken file in it. I took a file and I broke it off, and it's a metal file, designed to cut metal, not wood, and I stuck it in this block, and you'll see that this is about a 35-degree angle or so right here, okay? And I glued it in place, and then what I did is I kind of sanded down this section and rounded it over a little bit, so that way it won't scar up any wood or anything if it actually slips off or something, or it touches something. But this right here is designed to set on top of the frets and move back and forth down it to clean the edges up and put a nice edge on. Okay. Do you have to have this? No. You can take a file and just by hand do each one. Okay. You don't have to have it, but this just makes it a lot easier, and it also makes everything a little bit more consistent. You're going to need a crowning file, and crowning files you can get all over the place. You can get them on eBay, you can get them at STUMAC, get LMI, you can get them at places like Grizzly Industrial. There's some that are made out of diamond, there's some that are made out of carbon. Diamond ones obviously are perfect for everything because they are incredibly durable, and they make quick work out of a lot of stuff. If you're using stainless steel, you almost have to use it. Okay, on things like EVO or regular nickel, just a regular high carbon one will work just fine. And these also come with different crowns, different shapes to them, and different grits. Generally, I don't use things that are heavy, that have heavy grits. I'll use something that has a fine grit. I don't see the need for heavy grit. We're going to need a straight edge. I use this a lot. Okay, this is precision ground. This is very, very flat. We're going to be using this to make sure that when we start, this fretboard is perfectly flat. Okay, and that is probably one of the main things you have to keep in mind when fretting. Everything needs to be perfectly flat and even in order for you to have a very good fretboard. Okay, and to make sure that we have a nice perfectly flat fretboard, we have a precision ground sanding beam. Okay, this side I've got, I think this is 600 grit or 400 grit, and this side I have 320 grit. Okay, now this I use for both flattening the fretboard, but I also end up using this to take down any high spots on the fret wire. Now, because this neck, I spent a lot of care and time making sure it was perfectly flat and even all the way around this guy. It means that after I'm done putting my frets in, I will have to do very little, if any, fret crowning. Okay, but if this is not perfectly flat and it's not even, I guarantee you will have to use this, and you'll have to be taking off some material off the top of your fret wire, which is one more thing I should probably cover about fret wire before we actually get into the process of doing this, and that is sometimes fret wire comes very high. There's some that come and they're very, very tall, and the reason why you want to do that is if you have a fretboard and you're only replacing a couple of frets in it, but the fretboard is like a roller coaster, you can put that kind of fret wire in here and then sand it down. That extra height is there specifically just so that way you can even all the other frets when the fretboard isn't correct. Okay, so that's what that's for. There's one more thing that you do not have to have, but it makes things much easier, and that has to, and it's a wire radiusing tool, and what that does is it puts a radius that matches the fretboard, okay, on the wire. And I'm going to show you how this is used. I have one that I built years ago, that when I radius this, you'll see it and what it does and how it works, and it's very primitive. It's an old one and it's primitive, but it works. Like I said, a lot of the stuff that I'm showing you here is not how I actually do it on a day-to-day basis. This is pretty much like the old way of doing things, and it's a simple way of doing things, minimal tools, that type of stuff. Just like when I get ready to actually put the frets in this, I wouldn't ordinarily just do it like this where the neck was just setting here. I would have it in a neck jig and everything else, but that starts getting into more advanced things. You have to start buying more advanced tools. You have to, and the whole point of this course is really to get you to know how to build your own guitar with limited tools. You know, understand exactly why it works the way that it works and why you do the things that you do, the small details, all that other stuff. After you get where you can build guitars this way, this is when you start getting better tools. You start becoming more and more accurate, and there you go. One more thing is a Dremel with a disc on here that can cut metal. Sometimes I use this to help trim off the edges of the fret wire. Okay, sometimes, I don't always use it, sometimes I do, but this can also help you quite a bit. So now that we've gone over all that, the first thing that we have to do is we have to make sure that the depth of all of these fret slots is correct. So that what I mean by that is basically it has to be the height of the tang plus a little bit more. Okay, not a whole lot more, but it has to be minimum the height of the tang plus a little bit more. Okay, and that's when we're going to end up using our hand saws. And basically what we want to do is we want to come inside here, and we're going to be coming in and cutting at a curve like this. And the reason why we're cutting at a curve is because, remember, we radiused this fretboard, and at first we had a perfectly straight line that was straight across, but then after we radiused it, it took some of the thickness away. Now currently, looking at this, it's close to the height that it needs to be, but it's actually a little too shallow. So I'm going to have to go through by hand on each one of these, and cut the thickness of this, the depth of this, exactly as I need it. This also ends up cleaning out any sawdust or dirt or varnish or anything that you used on your neck if you finished it kind of like how I did here. Many people will not finish their guitar neck like I did until the frets are in. And I'm doing it like this for very specific reasons. But it's not, you can finish it any time that you want. It just, when it comes time to buffing your frets and stuff like that, you have to know exactly what you're doing, because if not, then you're going to end up having, you're going to have some problems on your finish. But the way that I know that this is the correct depth is I have markings on my knife here, and it tells me basically when the depth of it is correct. And as soon as I can see it hit that line, then I know that I'm at the correct depth. So we can get a business card and stick it in the slot here like this, and you'll see it fits just fine. Okay, and what we want to do is we need to find out exactly what the height of this tang is to make sure that it's the proper depth. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go the depth of the tang plus a little bit more, which is right there, okay, with my micrometer. And then now I'm going to mark this business card on both sides and then draw a line. So we're basically dealing with something like this. So like that would be 1, that would be 2, and I can use my straight edge right here to connect those two together. And this will tell me when I stick this in this business card in the slot, if it is deep enough. So by grabbing this, sticking it inside this slot, okay, and rocking it back and forth. Let me kind of show you what I'm talking about. We'll be able to see that this isn't quite right. But by putting it here and rocking it back and forth to match the fretboard radius, okay, we're going to see that this actually needs to be cut more. As soon as that line touches the top of it, of that slot, then we're good. That one needs to be cut more. This one needs to be cut more.
This one needs to be cut more. And then that's how I'm going to go about figuring all of these things out. So what we have here is a really old fret wire radius tool that I made. This has got two skateboard bearings here. This has got another bearing right here that I have ground a line in, so that way the fret wire has the tang has something to write on. And by putting this inside here, bringing this over and just kind of guiding it and bringing this through, this will actually end up putting a curve on the fret wire. Now the point of this is you want to have a radius that is a little bit more, a little tighter than what's actually on the fretboard. Okay? In other words, if your fretboard is 16, you'd probably want to radius this at about 14. And by looking at this, the width of this, I can tell this is about a 10-inch radius. Okay? And you want it to be a little bit tighter than what the fretboard is, so that way it sticks in there a lot better. Okay, if it's not quite, if it's the same radius or more, you're going to have problems getting the fret wire to actually stick in the fret slot. And I do this in increments. I do a small portion. I turn my knob here, which will bring this up, and I'll run it through again. If it pops out like that, I just kind of grab it and bring it back in. I don't want to have kinks in this fret wire anywhere. I want it to be continuous. And you can bend it by hand, but generally when you bend it by hand, it's not quite as accurate, but it does work. Okay, but now that's shortened to about 8. Okay, and this is the radius I'm going to end up using. Let's talk a little bit right now about the length of the fret wire and prepping it with the fret tang nipper. Okay, what you want to do is you want to cut, you put your fret wire up against where you know the fret you're planning on cutting. You want it to extend maybe 1/8 of an inch on this side, and you want to cut it where it's about maybe 1/8 of an inch from this side. Okay, and after you have that piece cut, you come in with your fret tang nipper, you trim off a piece like this, and now you can see that part of that tang is removed. Okay, and you want this tang. Let me actually cut this more for a better example. Okay, where this tang sets, let me get close here. You don't want it to be exactly on the end like this. You want it to be about here. Okay, and the reason why is because this will give you room, so that way the tang will never protrude on the outside of the neck. It'll give you room to go ahead and put some type of filler like a wood putty, but also because this is over radiused. As soon as you start putting pressure on it and you put this in, it'll stretch a little bit and move closer to the edge like that. And so you want a distance about like this, okay, away from the edge on both sides. So this would extend about 1/8 right here, and then you would go ahead and use your fret tang nipper and cut about that much off. Okay, and you're going to do that for every single fret. And like I mentioned before, it's not absolutely required, but it does make for a better finish, and it helps prevent frets eventually kind of protruding the fretboard and people running their hands down it, and it feels like their hands are getting cut up because the person that installed it didn't bother removing some of the tang. So now that we have this at the proper distance, one thing to keep in mind when you are cutting your frets, any pieces of these frets, get rid of them. Get them off your table. They will damage wood like none other. Okay, they'll scrape up finishes, they will dent things. Every little piece, get it off of your work table, get it out of your sight. Okay, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my syringe and I'm going to put some super glue in it. And like I said, you don't have to have a syringe. You can use, they actually sell syringes similar to this that are made for woodworking and things like that, but
the gauge of the needle is often either the same size as the fret, or it's a little bit bigger, and it can be a problem. So I'm only going to put enough inside here that I need for this particular job. I'm going to put my plunger in, and then I'm going to take it away from the table, turn it upside down, and push the plunger in to make sure that I'm not spraying super glue out, but what I'm doing is I'm just getting rid of air. I've got super glue inside here. Okay, this is how I do it. I make sure that there aren't any drips on it. Okay, I take this out. I put the syringe inside the slot, and I gently put a little bit of super glue inside there. And I don't want to put too much. If I put too much, it's going to spray out. I only want it to grab a little bit. Okay, so from here I take the fret, I find center, I put it where it belongs, like this. I take one of my hammers. I'm going to try the small one first. I start on one edge first, okay, like this. As soon as this side is in, I'm going to hit this side in. Okay, I'm going to have to use the larger hammer. After this side has been gently tapped in, I'm going to move back and forth and just sink this guy the rest of the way. Right here I see a little bit of super glue coming out of one of the ends, and I want to get that off of here as soon as I can. At the very end of where the fret is sticking out, hit slightly downward on it. Okay, same here. You don't have to use a lot of force. Okay, now what you want to do is you want to look at, is it setting perfectly flush with the fretboard? Okay, and I'm looking at this on both sides, and it's pretty good. Right here's a little high. That's good now. This is sitting in there. The bottom of the fret is touching the fretboard, and that's exactly what you want to see. You want this to be perfectly flat. If you can't get this thing perfectly flat, one of a couple of things has probably happened. The first is the super glue set up already. It sets up real fast because generally there's a little bit of wood dust inside these fret slots, and it'll mix with it and it'll harden. You only have a few seconds to get that fret in after you put your super glue. Another thing that could happen is you didn't make these the proper depth. These fret slots are not the proper depth. They're too shallow. That's the second problem. So now that we've got that, we're going to take our horizontal dikes, we're going to come over here, and we're going to grab the end of this. Okay, I just glued my fingers together. We're going to grab the end of it with our horizontal dikes, pushing down to get rid the majority of that. And like I said, these little pieces like this, get rid of them. Get them off your work surface. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing to this side. Get rid of that piece. Okay, and then that for now is as good as we have to get these sides. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue the process of what I just did here all the way down the fretboard. Nothing changes. It's the exact same thing that I just did. Now you can use things like your Dremel, okay, to come in to try to get a little bit tighter. To the fretboard if you want, so that way a little bit later on you don't have to file as much, okay? Because the filing takes a little while. But when you're doing that, be very careful that you don't hit the neck of the wood anywhere. But this is almost perfectly flush now, okay? That's what I use the Dremel tool for. If you don't have a set of horizontal dikes, you can use your Dremel. But once again, using a Dremel, you are risking cutting into your fretboard or your side or something like that, okay, unless you get really good with it. But like I said, I'm going to go through, I'm going to do every one of the frets inside the guitar neck here exactly like I did the first one. Nothing changes. And I do one at a time, and I make sure that I don't go to the next one until I know for sure that fret is perfect. That one is inside there, it's setting perfectly flush, everything. If it's not setting perfectly flush and I can't pound it in, I gently take the fret out and try cutting into it a little bit deeper, okay? Try it again. But you have to be very careful when removing frets because it's going to end up causing chip out. Some of this will want to chip. So that's why it's really important to make sure you measure your frets first with your card. They actually have tools too for that give you the proper radius, everything. To me, business card is much cheaper, it's easier and whatnot. But make sure it's perfect before you decide to start putting your frets in. Okay, so I went ahead and I did the rest of the frets, got them cut as close as I could possibly get it to the fretboard without damaging the fretboard. And every now and then you'll notice that where you cut the tang off for the edges, sometimes part of that fret will be a little loose. When that happens, once again, a syringe is perfect because you can squirt a little bit of super glue underneath that right there, clamp this down, and for maybe 5 minutes take it off and the fret will stay in place. You can also do that as a repair for a guitar that you didn't build but somebody else did, and there's a loose fret. You get your super glue, you squirt it in there, clamp that down, and then we're good to go. But we're at this point now where what we have to do is we have to take these sharp edges off the side and we have to basically even everything out. And that is when this guy right here comes in to play. What we're going to do is we're just going to lay this right on top of the frets and gently go back and forth over these until it puts that 35 degree or 30 degree, depending on what you're planning on doing, angle on all of the frets. And it takes a while to do this. And you'll know when you're finished doing this because you won't hear this chattering noise. That's the first. And also the edge of the file will gently touch the edge of the fretboard. And this takes a while to do, okay? This takes a long while. This is probably going to take me about 10 minutes or so to get these guys exactly how I want them. So, but you want to make sure that you're in full control over this block throughout the whole process. You don't want this thing to slip off and go over your frets, but that's one of the reasons why I ground this portion down, so if it does, it's not going to grind into them. So now that we have that finished, what we're going to do is we are going to get a notch straight edge. Now, you don't have to have one, but it makes your job easier. You can get these once again at luthier supply companies, eBay, all sorts of places. And we're going to set this on the neck because we need to straighten this neck out, okay? And we're going to look down the side of it to see if it's bowing if it's giving us a back bow or a forward bow or anything like that. And if it is and we can see a gap, we need to adjust the truss rod so that way the fretboard is flat and this is flat, okay? Now if you don't have one, you get a very similar result by just using your straight edge and seeing if it rocks or anything like that. Just trying to get all of these frets to touch the fretboard, which they do. And the reason why everything is working perfectly on this is because we made sure that the fretboard was perfectly flat, level, perfectly radiused. We made sure that every fret was set perfectly flat against the fretboard. If you mess up even one little section like that, you're going to end up having problems later on, right? But because of this, everything's golden. So the next step, just to make sure that all of these frets are literally perfectly flat, we're going to take a marker, here's a Sharpie, and I'm just going to go over the tops of the frets, making sure I'm very careful not to put any on my fretboard. And this black line is going to tell us if there's any high spots or there's any low spots. The majority of guitar companies and luthiers do not take that much care into their fretboard being perfectly radiused and flat before they fret. They also don't take a lot of care in putting the frets in, making sure that they're perfectly level and tight against the board. And they wouldn't even do this step right here, and that's one of the reasons why many of the store-bought guitars, you're going to have a difficult time getting them with very, very low action. Doing this will ensure very low action. So using 320 grit, I'm going to place it on top of here, the sanding beam, and I'm just going to gently go back and forth over this. And I don't want to take too much off. I only want to see if there's any high spots or low spots. I'm letting the weight of the beam do all the work. And by doing what I just did there, when I turn this up now, we can see a couple of low spots. We have a low spot here because the sandpaper didn't take that off. Everything else is pretty much perfectly flat. We have a couple of spots here that seem to be a little low. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to run the sanding block over this until these areas disappear. Then I know everything is perfectly flat. Okay, so these have all been leveled, and if it wasn't just for that one fret, we pretty much would be doing pretty good for ourselves. But that one fret can create a problem, so you have to make sure they're all right. And looking at this, you can see that there's just barely the top taken off. That's all you need. You don't have to get all of it off. So we're good. We're ready to start crowning. And to crown, we have to go through with the marker again, and we have to mark the tops of all the frets again, so that way when we crown, we can make sure that this time we want to leave a very thin line on top of the frets. Now, we just spent that time and effort trying to get these guys perfectly leveled. If we try to crown these and don't pay attention to the very, very tip of the fret, we risk making our frets unlevel again. And then all of that would have been for nothing. So I'm going to stand on the opposite side of the table here so you can see exactly what's going on with this. I've got a crowning file, and the crowning file I'm going to be using for two things. I'm going to be using it to put the curve back on the frets, but I'm also going to be using it to round over the edges slightly. Then later on I'm going to go with a small hand file to take care of the rest of it. But what we want to do is we want to take the file here, and we're running it down the side, as you can see, right? And then I'm going to take it on this side and do the exact same thing. What I want to do is I only want to hit the sides, I don't want to hit the top. When the sides disappear, for the most part, then I know that it's crowned. And you might not be able to see it, but there is a hairline, there is a very, very thin line of marker still on that fret at the very, very top part. That's what we want, okay? And this has been crowned. And you'll see that there might be a little bit of ink on the sides. That's okay. The important thing is the top still has a little bit of black. That's why I'm working the angles here. And that one is crowned. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to do this to every single one of these. making sure that they're all the same and they're nice and even. Okay, and that one is crowned. We didn't take a lot off, so it's not going to take me that long of a time to crown these. If we took a lot off, we would have to be doing some pretty serious filing in order to get these guys back to where they need to be. So now I'm going to take a very, very small file, and this is a metal file, and it's been ground down so it doesn't damage the wood. Okay, and you can find these on luthier supply company websites, as well as just going to an industrial company that sells a little bit of everything, and you can find files like this. You don't have to buy one specifically from a luthier supply company. And here on the sides of the fret, they're still sharp. Okay, actually let me switch to this one because it's centered. Okay, they're still sharp right here, and when I run my finger back and forth this way, I can feel that little bit of sharpness. So I want to round it over, and the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to take my file and I'm going to be basically coming in here and filing that corner off, and then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Okay, and I'm going to do this back and forth until that goes away. And also you're going to see that I'm going to grab the file, move it down, and while I'm coming down this way, I'm going to turn the file over so that way it gets the outside edge of this fret. Okay, this is rounding it over. I'm going to do the exact same thing on this side. And then as soon as that feels pretty good, I can stop. And sometimes you're going to feel a little, just a hair of metal down here. You can take the flat side of the file and once again just hitting that little area to get that out of the way, so that way the player's hand doesn't feel it. Now that feels good. I'm not worried about little scratches here and there, because after this is all done and it's been buffed, I'm going to go in and I'm going to repair the finish where I need to make sure that everything looks nice and even. So now that you've seen that, I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these off camera, and then we'll go to the next step. So now that I've got that done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of 600 grit, and with the 600 grit I'm going to kind of wrap it around my finger, and I'm going to go down the edges of these frets on the outside. Now this is just going to help knock down any last little remaining pieces of fret wire that might grab the player's hand. And I'm not overly worried about the finish coming off, because I can always touch that up a little bit later. And I put enough coats of clear on it that I'm probably just going to end up sanding through the clear. Okay, so that feels good. I'm going to do the exact same thing to the other side. Now, doing the exact same thing that I just did, I'm going to do it across the tops of the frets. Once again, I'm not worried about really going into the finish. Okay, we might get some black streaks or something, but I can always clean that up. So I'm just going to be going over the tops of the frets like this with 600 grit to take any scratches out, and also to help the round over. This will also end up actually help making the clear coat feel a little bit smoother, because when I buff these, the clear will also end up getting buffed. And now I have a piece of 1200 grit, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. So now that that's done, this is ready to buff, but I want to clean it just a little bit before I buff it. And I'm just going to use some simple green, or a generic equivalent. And this will take a lot of that stuff off of there. I just don't want to embed any of that really into the finish when I'm buffing it. And after I'm done buffing it, I'll have to clean it again, but I'll use something like naphtha to do that. But this will usually clean up the majority of this stuff off of here. And then now what I can do is I can go ahead and take this to the buffer and buff this out. Now, the mess that you kind of see that's on here is pretty much the reason why a lot of people like to finish this after the frets are in, okay? But I find that it's just not necessary. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking naphtha, okay, which ultimately is just lighter fluid, okay, Zippo lighter fluid, and I'm going to use that to take all of these markings off in order to clean up the fretboard. Naphtha will not harm the finish. So what I have here is just a little bit of maple wood filler. Okay, let me zoom in so you can kind of really get a good look at this. And I'm just going to put a little bit of this on my finger, and I'm going to go over every one of these, pushing it in place. While it's still wet, I'm going to take a rag and I'm going to wipe the extra off, so that way I don't have to worry about sanding or anything. This stuff does set up pretty quick though. And now I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side, but I want to make sure that I get as much of this stuff up as I can before it hardens. So I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit of this wax, and I'm just going to rub it all over the fretboard. And not only is this going to buff it out and everything, this is actually going to clean it a little bit as well. Okay. So now that that has kind of dulled up, I'm going to take my rag and go over the top of this, and you'll see that it does take some stuff up here, but I want this to be nice and clean, so when I ship this to the new owner of it, everything looks nice and bright and shiny. There are still parts of this neck that I need to wet sand and buff, but I'm not going to do that until I end up putting the logo on the headstock, which the person wants to have their name in the Fender font, so I have to do that. And in my video about painting and finishing, I'll show you how that's done, just like I'll show you about finishing a neck like this and stuff. And you can finish it after the frets are in. You don't have to do it like I do. You just have to clean up the frets afterwards. I just don't like doing that. But you'll see this does clean up even more of the frets. And trying to get all of this stuff up. And from here, I would say we are good, and we can actually start doing the nut now. So what do you think, guys? Turned out pretty nice, don't you think? It's definitely a very comfortable neck, and like I mentioned before, you know, I have to do a little bit of wet sanding and buffing, and I have to put a logo up here and stuff. But after that's done, this will be a very nice neck, and I think the new owner is going to be very happy with it. Now, this is pretty much the formula for nearly any neck that you're going to be building, right? Now, granted, this is for a bolt-on neck guitar, but really the only difference between a bolt-on neck guitar and maybe something like this one that I'm building is just the heel, the shape of the heel. And then this all gets into the design of your guitar, how you designed it. And you know, this particular one, the way that it sets inside the guitar, you know, it's a wedge fit, it's downward, and it's got a slight back angle to it. But it's, you know, got a curve right here. That's really the only difference. If you can build a neck like this, then you can build a bass neck. You can build set necks. You can build any neck that you want because the formula is always the same. There's only little things that change. Maybe the way that the headstock is built, or maybe how the truss rod is installed, okay? But it's all the same thing. And hopefully you learned quite a bit from this video. And in the next video, I'm going to be covering, you know, the types of wood to make a guitar body out of, or maybe even types of woods for the neck. I'm going to be going over different types of woods for the fretboards and things like that. I'm going to be going over how to build guitar bodies, also how to, you know, do the nut, how to install the hardware. And there's going to be a lot of information in the next video. And then I'll probably have one more video after that based on things like electronics and advanced advanced setups and things like that. The very last video is going to end up being the painting and finishing of your electric guitar, and that way you can end up putting any type of finish, any type of color, anything that you want. You'll be able to put it on your guitar and know how to do it, and it'll look professional. People will sit there and say, "Oh, that's a great neck. Where'd you buy it? That's a great body. Where did you buy it?" And be like, "I built it, dude." Right? So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll have more coming soon. Right now, it's about 2 weeks for every video that I'm going to be coming out with, and you know, these videos take me a long time to do. The one that you just watched for the neck, this was more than 6 hours of video that I had to edit and compress into the 3 hours, okay? So it takes me a while to do this stuff. But anyway, until next time, this is William Gelvin. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.